let me turn to you.
Next. You know, as the Admiral and Ray have pointed out, we've made tremendous progress with existing tools. But there's a need for both drugs and vaccines to really realize the full potential of the Global Malaria Action Plan. One area in particular that's been of growing concern is the emergence of artemisinin resistance. And so maybe you can tell us about what MFE is doing to fill that pipeline of new drugs for the horizon.
Thanks very much, Chris. Just to, I think, reflect on, firstly, the role of MMV. We're a not-for-profit organisation. We work in partnership to discover and develop new drugs, affordable malaria drugs, and to bring them to the people that need them. And I think one of the key things here is that we're working in partnership, which means that what we're doing is really scouring every opportunity and every avenue to develop new drugs, and that's arisen or generated around 140 partnerships with academia, the private sector, and the endemic countries in 37 different countries. So it's quite a wide reach currently. We've been in existence for around 11 years, and I guess one of the questions you have to ask is, so what's happened in that 11 years? Ray mentioned one of the key achievements, and that was for children with malaria. That represents around 85% of those who are seriously affected by malaria. And working in partnership with Novartis Pharmaceuticals, we've been able to develop a pediatric formulation that was approved, and in the 20 months since it's been approved, that's reached 55 million children in endemic countries, principally in Africa. And so we see that as a key achievement in the fight, but clearly it's only the beginning, and I think as you mentioned, the threat of artemisinin resistance, there's a lot more to be done. One of the other areas that I think is of key concern and opportunity is the availability of quality drugs. And Ray also mentioned that ACTs are only reaching around 20% of those that need them today. One of the key things is that the artemisinins, the combination therapies that do reach people, are quality drugs. And so we've expended effort also working with a Chinese pharmaceutical company to ensure that an injected form of these drugs, which is required for the management of very severe cases of malaria, actually achieves good manufacturing practice standards of production, and that resulted in the pre-qualification of the drug. So this is a key milestone because although it's not particularly technically challenging, the result is significant because having availability of quality drugs is one of the key objectives also of MMV. If we look forward, there's a number of key unmet needs beyond that, and I think that reflects some of the drugs that we've got in development. So if you look at artemisinin resistance, what we need is a wider variety of these drugs with different profiles to meet the needs of different patient populations. And two of those new artemisinin combinations that have been developed with MMV support are currently going through the EU regulatory process. So stringent regulatory approval, that'll be followed by WHO pre-qualification, we hope, and then ultimately it'll reach more patients. So that will allow us to impact that 80% or so of malaria cases that aren't getting the ACTs they need today. I think if we look at resistance, one of the key problems that can potentially generate resistance is the fact that these artemisinin drugs are sometimes used as monotherapy, single drugs, where they need to be used as combinations in order to reduce the chance that resistance will arise. And so having the availability of more of these types of drugs, quality drugs, can actually reduce the chances that artemisinin resistance will occur. I think before I go on to the novel classes of drugs, because clearly that is the next step that we need to be looking at here, it's really important to reflect upon the fact that within the 80% of people who still need access to ACTs, there are still some unanswered medical questions. One of them is dosing of neonates, extremely young children. There just isn't the data available, and this is a yawning gap that we must fill, and that we will be working with our partners to fill, to make sure that we understand how to safely dose the very youngest of our patients. And this is the most vulnerable group of all. Another particularly vulnerable group where there is another yawning gap in terms of knowledge is in pregnant women, because they're disproportionately affected by malaria, so affecting both the pregnant mother and the unborn fetus. And so we're currently embarking on studies of combinations of drugs, including anti-malarial and antibiotic therapy, which can have a significant impact here. And we're looking at outcomes of morbidity and mortality in the mother and fetus to actually improve the outcome and reduce the chances of severe disease and death in this population. And what's interesting about this is the antibiotic component may actually have other impacts in some of the other infections that cause significant morbidity and mortality in this group. So I think that really brings us, Chris, to your point of, so what's on the horizon and what are the next drugs? So, we really need to develop drugs that can contribute strongly to the eradication of malaria. And we need to ensure that these drugs are adapted to the very harshest of conditions. And what that means is that we need drugs that are safe, with minimal side effects, and really simple to take. And so one of the key areas where we're focusing our activities right now is on the promise of some of the drugs in our portfolio that have the potential to be single-dose cures. So drugs with very long pharmacokinetic half-lives that are safe and can sustain that level of drug and can cure with a single pill. And we have very promising compounds in the portfolio, but I think one that I'd like to highlight that's currently in clinical studies is a drug called OZ439. Really, this is one that is currently achieving the type of profile that we believe could be a game changer in the area of malaria. Because if you think about it, this will open the door to directly observed therapy, so you can ensure that a patient gets their medication, takes the full course that they need because it's only one pill. That, in turn, has the prospect of giving better clinical outcome and reduction of the chance of resistance. The other promise that these drugs hold is that because they have a very different structure to the current drugs, it gives us two advantages. Potentially, we're not going to be reliant upon the natural plant source that's required to produce them. So that gives a certain independence. They can be cheaper to produce in addition to that. So I think that in these regards, it's very positive, but also the different structure means that they have a very high likelihood that they'll be active against artemisinin and resistant parasites. And so we're putting a lot of effort here because we believe that this is the type of focus and the type of compound that ultimately will contribute strongly to the eradication of malaria. I think that just in terms of, that describes some of the drug development activities. Access is also critically important, and there's an arm of MMD that's working really closely with the regulatory authorities and with endemic countries around access. Why I say the regulatory authorities is that it's absolutely imperative that when we make these drugs available, we make them available in packaging and with information that is really relevant and understood in the local environment and in the local communities. So this requires the development of artwork where literacy may be an issue, and the testing of that to ensure that the people who get access to this can actually perform the tasks, dose children accurately, etc., because in turn this gives better outcome and lessens the chance of resistance. The final remark that I'd like to make is one that you've heard all of the other presenters make today, and that is that none of this work would have been possible without two key things. One is partnership across the board with the various agencies, with the endemic countries, with the private sector, who are contributing so strongly to this effort. And the other is to our funders. And so we owe a deep debt of gratitude to groups like the President's Malaria Initiative, USAID, Also the NIH. NIH is currently funding some of the early investigation work that may actually give rise to new drug targets and totally new drug classes for malaria, and this is critically important. UK DFID, also we have the foundations such as Bill and Melinda Gates. So without this type of funding and that sustained funding, none of this work would have been possible. So we'd like to give our sincere gratitude for that support, and also to assure you that that we will do everything in our power to ensure that the drugs that we're developing are rigorously assessed, that they give rise to good and effective medicines, and they reach those that need them. So thank you very much for your support.